Today on the rack we have a 1970 911T. This car's been sitting in storage for a couple of years. We're going to do some basic maintenance, change the oil, change the gear oil, temporarily install some batteries so this car can be prepped for transport back to its owner. So this car, the last time we saw it was approximately 10 years ago. And the owner, who used to live locally, he has moved back east. But a couple of issues is he's got these new batteries that he wants to use. They're a pretty nice looking battery. Problem is they're way too small. One of the issues that we've got is the rust work. You can see here where my finger just goes through the gas tank support. The frame rail too is also rusted out. And this is the remnants of the old hold down clamp, but it's rusted off. So this part of the frame rail needs to be cut off and replaced. So for transport purposes, all we're going to do is get these batteries in and just jam them with some foam for right now. Ideally, what I would have done was made probably a Delron piece to go on top. That way I could use the factory clamps and still have them fit inside the box. But that's a project for another day. So if we look here, we can see the gas tank support right here is done. We can see all the way through to the floor. And this is pretty common on these cars. You hear how this little piece of plastic just slides in. It shouldn't do that. This is supposed to be solid. And this is all the way along this front section here. We got holes. Underneath the car is about the same. Not the worst we've seen. Also, we can see around the other battery box where we've got the same kinds of issues, a lot of surface rust. So the frame rail, the front part of the frame rails will need to be replaced, the gas tank support, and the front floor pan. Not a big deal. So one of the things I usually like to do for these kind of cars is just kind of document things, like we've got a rock chip here. That way, if there's anything that kind of happens in transport, we have a record of what it looked like. So not doing a major inspection, just looking for obvious stuff. No real dents. Everything's in pretty good shape. Rims don't look all scratched up. They're in reasonable condition. In the back here, I've already done an initial inspection, so I've got the air cleaner off and pulled a plug. We've still got to check out plug wires just to make sure that they're within spec, even though these are the incorrect ones for the car. It's not a major deal. It's just going to reduce the spark energy to the spark plugs. All in all, for a 50-year-old car, 52 years old, pretty clean. So underneath the car, we've already done an inspection and provided a quote to the owner. He wants to do a lot of this stuff himself, which is totally fine. But if we take a look along the motor, pretty much standard for an old engine, leaking from pretty much everywhere. When I look back through my notes from 10 years ago, the leak points are all pretty much the same as they were 10 years ago, just got a little bit worse. All not a major deal. A couple of things that we want to look at too down the transmission. We've got obvious intermediate plate leak points, and this was very common with the early transmissions, the 901s. This intermediate plate had a lot of issues. We also have right up here, this is coming out of the gear shift seal. So that's something that would usually require a reseal. One of the other points that we're looking at, if we take a look, we can see here our axle boots are all pretty much done. And we do have one that has split right here. So this is something that needs to be changed relatively soon. The axles themselves feel good. No movement. And the way I would check these would be to grab them and rotate them back and forth. And what I'm trying to feel is a clunking sound. And neither one of those axles, when I reach up, is doing that. So the joints still feel good. They've got good movement side to side. Just got to change the boot. One of the other points we have is shock bushings are done. I drove this car from storage, and it was pretty squishy on the road, so it needs pretty much shocks all the way around. Tires are also 17 years old. They do have some wear on inside edges. It does need an alignment, so there's a lot of suspension work that needs to be done. One of the big points is on the rear torsion bars, and what we're looking at here is we have a large gap down here and a very small gap up here. And what this is this torsion bar bushing is worn, and so it's actually rubbing onto the steel bracket, which creates a squeak. Also changes how the spring works. It's not very efficient. All the trailing arm bushings are worn out as well, and as well as up in the front we've got some other issues going on there as well. So in the front we can see tie rod end boots are split right here, same on both sides. So these are well and truly done. There is no fix for this. They are starting to show some signs of wear. We've got a little bit of wheel bearing movement in the front as well. That's not as major deal. That can be adjusted. Underneath here we can see our front floor pan. We have a rust hole forming here, as well as around where the front A-arms support. This is fairly normal. If we can sneak up here, we can see we've got pretty good hole right here. So front floor pan will need to be replaced. Certainly not the worst that I've seen. I've seen a lot worse than this in cars still driving. So front tires the same as the back, scrubbed out on the inside edge. This car felt like it had a lot of toe in when I was driving it. Also, here's the wear bar here. These are not serviceable. Even if they weren't 17 years old, there's still time to replace. They're just right there on the wear bars. Tire wear is the same on both sides. This car needs a set of torsion bars, front and rear. We can also see, if we can walk back, if we look at the torsion bar adjustment, which is right here, this being the left side, we can see this bar is screwed up all the way. If we look to the right bar, how it's in the center right here. And what they've done is, to adjust for a worn torsion bar, they've cranked this bar all the way up to try and get the ride height a little better than it would be. So this here is not normal. This is an aftermarket air conditioning condenser. These were fitted by a shop in California, which is where this car comes from. They don't make them anymore. They couldn't get compressors and a few other things, so they've stopped supplying these. But when you see these under the car, this is not original. This is an aftermarket kit. Just a little side note. So what I'm going to do first is I'm just going to get the oil fluids draining out of the car. It's going to take a little bit because I haven't run it today, so everything's a little cold. We do have the heat on in the shop, so I'm just going to pull the drain plugs and let it sit and drip for a minute. Doesn't look too horrible. Drain plug, not any big chunks on it. So I got a new aluminum drain sealing washer on it, one shot deal. And the tightening torque on these is 45 Newton meters. About the same, nothing horrible looking. Oil's not super horrible, a little dirty, but all in all, pretty nice. So I'm going to put the drain plug back in and tighten it, and then I'm going to pull the strainer plate off. So we're going to pull the strainer to wash it, clean it. There's a couple of different trains of thought with this. Some people say you don't have to do it every oil change. Some people say you do. Personally, I like to take a look in there. It's not that much work or that much cost. And at least that way you can take a look and see if there's any chunks of carbon, especially on an older engine, or anything that shouldn't be there, and catch it earlier before you have a catastrophic failure. So I'm just going to let some of that drain out so I don't get an armful of it when I pull it off. And then we'll pull the last nut and drop it out. Nice and clean. Looks good. Let it sit and drip for a minute. And this is one of those areas that you don't want to have any sealant on it, on anything. So this one, we can see we've got, that looks like a piece of silicone that somebody has used, sitting in on the strainer plate. Wasn't there 10 years ago when I last took this strainer plate off. But on the whole, looks good. No big chunks of anything. The other thing I'll do is I'll take my finger and kind of pull stuff out just to see around if there's anything sitting on this ledge. Doesn't feel bad in there, a little bit of carbon. But really pretty clean. I've cleaned everything up. I've scraped the gaskets. We don't want to use any sealant on these at all. The other thing you want to pay attention to is this point. These have already been tapped down the last time I had it off. And what happens is people over tighten these nuts and they drag up and they make like a little mountain there, and then you have a valley that the gasket won't seal. So you want to make sure this is as flat as can be. It'll never be perfect. That's why we use a gasket. One of the challenges about resealing these is you can't have any oil on the gasket surface. So what I tend to do is I'll actually stuff a shop towel. This is the one that I had. Actually into the engine, making sure I leave a large chunk of it out so I can see it, just to absorb it, because oil's going to want to run out of this direction and run out of this direction. And then once I'm ready, I'm going to go over with another towel, clean off any of the oil. I've already used my brake cleaner, because if you have a large amount of oil on this surface, the gasket won't seal and it will leak. So literally, once you're going, you want to take your finger, go all the way up in there. There's a little reserve of oil that's going to want to drain, and the same this direction. Get all of that oil out of there. Then you want to go fairly quickly with the next part. And then drain plug, you want to make sure it is over to the left side of the vehicle. And usually what I'll do is I'll get 2 nuts and washers on just to lock it down so any oil that is still draining doesn't get in between the sump plates and the gasket. All of this is also new hardware, new washers, new nuts. Pretty industry standard for Porsche on this stuff. So the tightening torque on these is going to be around 8 to 10 Newton meters. I'm just nipping them down for right now. As I said, I want to seal it, and I'll come back with a torque meter and check them. Okay, everything torqued to 10 Newton meters. So the next thing we're going to do now, we've got the engine all drained out, is we're going to drain the transmission. And that's really tight. That one's going. Always want to crack the top one before you pull the bottom drain plug out, just in case if you pull the bottom one and then the top one's seized in and you can't get it out, now you've got a real problem. At least if you crack the top and the fill, you know that once you drain the transmission, you'll be able to put fluid back in it. These are a tapered plug, and they tend to get over tightened very easily. So sometimes just need more leverage. You never want to measure the cracking torque on one of these as well. I've seen other people try to figure out a tightening torque. The tightening torque on these is really low. It's only at 25 Newton meters or 18 foot-pounds because it is a taper. And trying to measure that, you'd probably get 50 or 60 foot-pounds is what it took to undo this. If you did it back up with that, you're just going to split the case. Let's see where the level is. Oh, right there. Pretty clean, pretty stinky. Ooh, drain plug does not look so good. We'll clean that off a little bit, take a look and see what it looks like, see if there's any major chunks. This is a lot of fines. What I'm looking for is like a big chunk of something, and this is all fine. So this would be what I would say normal wear and tear. Nothing to be too worried about. Transmission drove okay, the shift was pretty loose. Not a function of the transmission, more the shift forks. Let's just dig out in here. Yeah, that's all fines, wear and tear, little pieces of bearing, little pieces, mostly probably the metal off the synchros themselves. Nothing that I would call horrible. Just the owner's going to have to keep an eye on it and how it drives. Cleaned drain plug, you'll never get all of it. There's a couple of little pieces there, but I got the majority of it out. And like I said, one of the biggest problems with these is they are over tightened. So we're just going to use a torque wrench at 25 Newton meters, even though it's a big plug. And that is it. Any tighter than that, and all you're going to do is damage the case. I've actually seen these where they've been so tight that they've actually split down here, in which case you're done. Time for a new case. On this particular job, the owner provided the gear oil. This is a Motul SAE 75W90. It's 100% synthetic. Certainly not my choice. These transmissions were never designed for a synthetic, and mainly because of the gasket and sealing areas. These will tend to leak a little bit more when you use a synthetic oil. Not that it's a bad oil or doesn't meet the minimum requirements. I don't understand how it can meet the API GL4 and GL5. Difference between that is GL5 typically has an additive in it for limited slip differentials. I typically use a Swepco mineral oil GL5 spec or a Stay Lube are my favorite ones. The other thing that makes it hard about doing this is typically we pump oil, and because we do not use this brand, I can't put it in, just dump it into my regular containers. Now we got to try and get it up and in there to fill, so that's often going to be a problem. All right, we're on the last bottle, and what we're going to do is fill it till it starts coming out of the fill plug. So these will take around 2.5 liters. And then we just want to let it stabilize that height. Okay, our oil level stabilized. And just putting the plug back in. Same torque on this one, 25 Newton meters. I'll wash the area down. Make sure that I don't add to the oil level mess. I'm not looking to clean the entire transmission here, just clean the oil off that was a result of draining and refilling. On this car, we're going to be doing a valve adjustment. I can do it with this hose here, but it is a lot easier with it out. So I'm just going to go and pull it. Let it start to drain and drip. When it comes to undoing the one on the oil cooler, extremely important that you have a backup wrench. This is a 32 millimeter on the oil cooler and a 36 for the actual nut. And what we'll usually see when you don't use a backup wrench is you will twist the oil cooler fill tube and basically cause about $1,500 worth of damage. Now I don't have to take it all the way off. I just need it out of my way. And I find if I just nip it back up with it hanging down, it'll direct all of that oil into my oil drain and I won't make a huge mess over my heat exchangers. Just pulling the valve cover to do our valve adjustment. Just pulled all the nuts and washers. Still have my oil drain under here because we're going to have some oil leakage coming out. So just going to let that sit and drip for a little bit. I'll use a little bit of brake clean and hose that excess oil out. We have drained the oil already, so there shouldn't be a lot coming out. It's just kind of whatever's sitting right here. And then I'll just run my fingers here. Should come out pretty clean, no chunks, which it is. So everything looks pretty normal. To the other side, just going to do the same thing. Pull all the bolts, all the nuts, the washers, and drop the cover. And then these are a one-time use, so we don't ever bother saving them. We just throw them in the trash. The other thing you want to do is you want to make sure you hose down the exhaust where the oil dripped on it so you don't have any obnoxious smoke once you're all done. So we were the last ones in here 10 years ago. And literally all I have to do, because I did not load it up with a bunch of any kind of sealant, is just scrape the remnants of the gasket off, which is all you should ever have to do. There's no reason to put sealant on any of these surfaces. If you feel there is a reason because of leakage, then it's probably the valve cover's not flat or the cam box is being damaged, in which case you need to rectify that. These valve covers are the updated ones, so they have the extra ribbing in them to support them. They're the turbo covers. I find that most cars these days have these. 20 years ago it was more often to not find these and have to put them on, but most cars that are being kept in service have already been changed to these. So before I move on, the first thing I always like to do is check my head stud torques. And this is a part for every valve adjustment. And I want to know if I've got any that are loose or broken before I move on, because if I do, then there's no point doing a valve adjust if I've got broken head studs. Tightening torque on these is 35 Newton meters. The book says 33, I use 35 just to see if they're going to break. And no loose ones, no breakage. Move over to the other side. That one was a hair loose. Good. Only one of them felt a little on the loose side. These early motors are not such a bigger concern as the later 2.7s and up, but still something you need to check. I've still got to do the top ones once we get the top covers off. Before I bring the car down, the next thing I'm going to do is my rocker shaft torques. The rocker shaft is placed correctly. You should see here you've got a thin end, and then on this other one you can see there's the thick end. You want the edge of the rocker shaft being just right up against the boss of the aluminum. And we're just going to use a 5mm Allen wrench and make sure that these are all tight. Okay, so I just got my 5mm Allen wrench and I'm just looking to make sure these are tight. So nice and tight. We're just looking for no movement. If the shaft spins, then we'll have to go and actually torque it. But right now, and we're tight. Do the other side. And tight. So this is a common area for leakage. These shafts coming loose. And what you'll think it is the cam box is leaking because it'll drip down from here. But in fact, it runs out, pulls up right here, and then drains down the back out between the cylinder head and the cam box. So now we're going to bring the car down and pull the top covers off, check our head stud torques, rocker shaft torques, and start to do our valve adjustment. I've already pulled the spark plug connectors. One thing that we always want to do on these is pop the boot back and unscrew them. This is often one of the most overlooked serviced items. We need to check the internal resistance. These ones are the wrong ones for the car. They won't hurt much. The effect of using the later model wire set on an earlier car is literally just reduced spark plug voltages. It's not going to hurt anything, but it will make it slightly less efficient. Also want to make sure these brass ends on these are typically the 911 SC wires. They're used on the 78 through 94 turbos and on the SCs from 78 to 83. Okay, we'll check these in a minute. So next I'm just going to pull our top covers and then I'll pull our plugs and we'll check head stud torques, rocker shaft torques, start going through our valve adjustment. Same deal as the bottom side, trash. No need to keep these for anything. All right, so I'm pulling the plugs, even though we're not replacing them. Makes it a little bit easier to do the valve adjust, just turning the engine over. Plus, I want to look and see if they do need to be replaced. These are actually in pretty good shape. Even though the last time they were done was 10 years ago, the car has not done a lot of mileage. So this is cylinder 1, 2, and 3. This is what I would consider normal. Plug is not worn hardly at all. There's still nice sharp edges on everything. These have a little V cut in them. Spark plugs that are in this are WR5 DCs, which spark plugs originally would not have been resistor, but today it is really hard to be able to find them. This is an earlier, you see it's got the 2 green, still a WR5 DC, still the same plug. It's just a slightly earlier build. This one's a nice color. This is cylinder 5 and 4, and these are a little on the lean side. Nothing to be too concerned about. We'll check it with carburation, part of what we're doing here anyways. Same as the bottom, we want to do our head stud torques on the intake side as well. That one tightened up just a little bit. Same as the exhaust side, 5mm Allen wrench, and we want to go in and make sure that all of our rocker shafts are tight. A little bit of work by Braille here. Alright, so now I want to get it up onto TDC, and we've got our timing marks. Somebody's hit with some white paint, but I need to know if I'm 1 or 4. So if I look at my ignition rotor, and our rotor right now is pointing opposite, so that's at number 4. So we got to bring the engine round 360 degrees. Okay, so our ignition rotor is pointing to our timing mark in our distributor. Our Z1 mark is lined up on the crankshaft, and we should have number 1 rocker is loose. So I'm going to go ahead and check the valve adjustment. Feels nice. Okay, moving to the next cylinder. So this one's a little tight. I'm going to loosen it up. So this one is a hair on the loose, but I don't think I would tighten it, just because when I get the gauge to just the right place, it actually feels pretty good. That one's definitely loose. Done with the valve adjustment. I'm just putting my spark plugs back in. It's easier to do this with the cover off. It just gives you more room to get in and put the plug in. And then we'll put on fresh gaskets and get the covers back on. So we have our gasket set, and these will come with all of your nuts, washers, gaskets. I like the ones with the silicone bead on them. But the ones without work just fine too. This one's on. One of the most overlooked parts of doing a service on a 911, whether it's an early or a later model one, air-cooled, is checking the resistance on the plug connectors. These are the most common causes for misfire. So all I'm going to do first is I'm just going to put my meter together and see how much resistance I have through my cables, which is a 1/2 ohm. It's probably less than that, but that's just as accurate as this meter will get. So when I'm measuring, I want to come in from the bottom and then in on the top, and sometimes you've got to use an extension. So the spec on this should be 3,000 plus or minus 10%. And then the most important thing you need to do is tap the center of the plug connector against the side of your toolbox. And it should stay at that 3,000 plus or minus 10%. On the early cars, 1969 through 1977, 1964 through 1977, the resistance should be 1,000 ohms plus or minus 10%. And then we're just going to tap it. And when we're tapping, what we're doing is inside this connector is a long brass post with a spring, and then there's a resistor here. And what can happen is the springs can break. And when you tap them against the side of your toolbox, what you're doing, if it has a broken spring in it, the resistance will change. That was just me losing the point on my meter. The resistance will change and go open circuit. Getting this top one in is a little bit of a challenge. That's why sometimes it'll pop off. Okay, so this one's at 2.7. It's on the low side of the plus minus 10%. 10% would be 0.3, so it's still usable. Okay, so these are all good. We can go ahead and screw those back on. When I'm putting these back, I don't care which cylinders they came from. I just put them back wherever if they test fine. You want to screw them on tight, but not so tight that you rip the little brass connector out, and then just suck the boot up. Then the little water shields, pop them up and push them down a little bit. When you install these, we're looking for a positive click sound onto the spark plug, like that. If you don't get that positive click, because you can just stick them in there like that, and technically they might work, but they got to get that solid click onto the plug. Just reconnecting my oil pipe again. And don't forget to hold the backup wrench on the oil cooler, because otherwise you'll just twist it. And we got the other side to do now. I'm gonna change the oil filter now. And I always just loosen it. Take my shop towel, jam it up under there to grab whatever oil is gonna come out. Wasn't too bad. And normally I'll just grab some of the engine oil, lubricate that seal because you don't want to put it on dry. Tighten it up. Now we're ready to refill it with engine oil. So when you put your oil filter on, you don't need to really crank down on it. You certainly do not need to use your oil filter wrench to tighten it. Just want to bring it down until it's firm. And you can see this isn't super tight. That's it. And then when we fill the engine on an early car, we're going to fill it with about 9 quarts oil before we go and start it. And then we'll top it off once it warms up and the cooler opens up. And the oil that we're using today is Valvoline 2050 Racing. It is a non-synthetic oil. I have 9 quarts of oil in the engine. Everything's buttoned up. All of my plugs are back in. And now we're ready to start it up. I've got all my air filter off because I want to check out balance. Still got to change the V-belt though. We're waiting for that to come in. And so now we just want to heat it up. Get our engine so the thermostat back here opens up. This is our thermostat, and we can get oil flowing through it, and it'll probably take another quart or 2 to top this off.